Greetings, Cassidy Clanners. Veronica Williams here, coming to you from Australia. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. The first session I gave you was a bit of background on DNA testing and our Cassidy projects. I hope this session will give you some ideas about how DNA testing can help you with your own research. It can be a long-term endeavour, which you will see as I talk through my progress with my family. My Cassidy family, as I said this morning, starts with Rebecca Cassidy, who was born in 1852. My earliest Cassidy ancestor who came to Australia is Thomas Cassidy, and that's his wife there. She's not really a Cassidy, but she's known as Mary Cassidy. She's really a Sweeney, but it's the best photo I had to show on this slide, so forgive me. So my ancestor, as I said earlier, was my great-grandmother, Rebecca Cassidy, born in 1852. She's the daughter of Thomas Cassidy and Mary Sweeney from Fermanagh. Now, Rebecca was the ninth of 12 children to Mary Sweeney. We don't believe that Thomas and Mary ever married, and she was said to be the finest horsewoman in the New England district, riding side saddle. Now, my Cassidy family in Australia were considered to be holier than the Pope. Philip Cassidy, son of the Philip Cassidy, the convict, was the first Australian educated priest and was created posthumously the title of Venerable Archdeacon, heroic in virtue, which is only a couple of steps from a saint. His sister Catherine was also a nun, and there were many other religious in the family. So it was a great surprise to all of us to find out that they were actually convicts, transported in 1830 for throwing their landlord's horse from a cliff and killing it. Now, the father, Stephen, wasn't transported, and it was said to have been because of his age, according to a newspaper report, but that was considered unusual at the time. Now, I've never been able to find out what happened to Stephen. Interestingly enough, there were on the Hercules II, which was the ship that brought them to Australia, also on board there were 18 Catholics involved in the famous 1829 sectarian fight called the Mackin Fight. Now, a number of those who were transported due to the Mackin Fight had links to other Cassidy family members, including a Hugh Cassidy who was charged but was not transported. And this is not surprising if Captain Cassidy was in fact the leader of the Ribbon Men. Both trials are on the same day. So the crime took place in Gort Gaul in Fermanagh, which was where the Cassidys came from, and they threw their landlord's horse over the cliff at Belmore Mountain, and the landlord, we believe, was Reverend Andrew Clark, who was still living there by the time of the Griffiths valuation. Now, back in 2017, we had the fabulous experience, thanks to Oliver Cassidy and a range of other people there in Fermanagh, for taking us up to the site of Belmore Mountain and seeing exactly where this crime was committed. It was a wonderful day, and we were joined by my cousins who were in that photo there, two Australians, Des and Donna, and Oliver and his sister. And we were fortunate enough to be interviewed by the BBC. So it was a fabulous day. Now, as far as Thomas is concerned, Thomas actually left a wife and 2 daughters in Ireland, as it states there on the convict indent, when he tried to marry another woman named Margaret Reeves in Australia. This marriage wasn't allowed because of his wife and 2 daughters in Ireland. So I don't know what happened about that relationship, and later he took up with Mary Sweeney. So we've long wondered what happened to this wife and 2 daughters. Another mystery we have is in relation to his brother Edward. So Edward escaped the colony in 1833, so he was only here for 3 years, and a newspaper report suggests he was arrested in Ireland in 1849. So what happened to him? I've been unable to find out. What we know about Thomas and Edward's father is that The Cassidys were evicted from their lands in 1826, and whilst he was not transported due to his age, that seems quite unusual for the time because many older people were transported. His landlord was known to have said that he wanted the Cassidys out of the country, and that has been suggested that perhaps that means transportation. So I've done quite a bit of research on Stephen Cassidy, and one of the documents that appeared in Australia is like a little family history where he's described as the outstanding young Catholic captain. And they make the comment that he was based with the military at the garrison in Fermanagh, but we don't think that's probably right. Peter McGuinness, a well-known Irish poet and writer, had a fictionalised serial in the Lisbello Gazette in 1879 where he suggests that Stephen was over 70 in 1835 and had a large family. So there must be more Cassidys out there related to myself and my family and Stephen Cassidy, and some of the newspaper reports may suggest that he may have been the infamous Captain Rock, leader of the local secret society of ribbonmen. So a connection to the Mackin fight is, if this is correct, is possibly another avenue of research that we can do. Now, back in Australia, Thomas Cassidy and his brother Philip lived and died in Australia after they were transported in 1830 and had quite large families themselves. When they died, there was no information about their mother, so both certificates suggest Stephen Cassidy as their father, but both death certificates have unknown Briton on them in terms of their mother, so clearly nobody knew the name of the mother. So this has been one of the things that I had wanted to find out. After many years of research, I did come across this Bible through a woman in the States suggesting that this James Cassidy, born in 1810, might be the son of Stephen Cassidy and a woman named Kitty Britton. Now, what are they brothers of my family or not? Due to the absence of records in Ireland, it was very difficult to know whether this was the same family. So that's the end of the paper trail that we have on my Cassidy family, and I was finding that it was very difficult to go back any further. So I turned to DNA. Now, my DNA goals when I started for my Cassidy side of the family, the first thing I wanted to do was to find another DNA cousin in Australia who was a male carrying the Cassidy surname so that I could actually compare them and see and make sure that my Cassidy line research was correct. And then possibly think about a howDNA test. The second goal was to, once I'd confirmed that person as a DNA cousin, to upgrade their test to howDNA test to help get the male Cassidy line back to Ireland. The family Bible was another lurking issue, and I wanted to be sure that those people were also connected and that James was in fact another brother, because if I could confirm that James was another brother, then I could also confirm that their mother's name was Catherine or Kitty Britton. I also wanted to find out about Thomas's first wife and his two daughters and see if I could find them and what happened to them, because they never came to Australia, even though there were programs to get couples reunited who had been separated through transportation, and many of the others on the ship Hercules too had reunions with their families. So why didn't Thomas also? So that's a mystery I'm still working on, and the last thing I wanted to do was to find out the whereabouts of Edward, the escaped convict. did he live and have more descendants? The Peter McGuinness story suggests he went back to Ireland and was later then went to America to get his sweetheart. Is this true or not? So one of the things really we have to bear in mind with DNA testing, that you can't just work on the DNA matches alone. The same as you can't just work on your traditional research alone. You might be researching the wrong ancestors. So the first thing is to start with your traditional research and what is it telling you. Once you've done a DNA test, you need to be making sure that your research is confirmed with DNA and you're getting matches to the right families. So if you're seeing matches that are connecting you to the Cassidy family, that's fine. But if all your matches are on other lines and you can't see any connections, you really need to think about whether those ancestors are the right ancestors. And what you'll often find is your DNA matches might give you clues that you hadn't thought about to do more traditional research. Okay, so as far as the DNA story goes, as I said at the outset, I wanted to find an Australian cousin who I could arrange to test, with the view to possibly doing a howDNA test further down the track if I found that they matched my family and were probably a descendant of Thomas Cassidy, the same as me. So in 2014 I actually found Des, and he was in that picture earlier up on the mountain in 2017. And that was the first time I actually met Des in Ireland. But Des tested for me in 2014, and it was fabulous because we matched. And so Des is my third cousin, and Des is also a cousin to my mother, of course, and he also matches her as a second cousin once removed. So that is good, and it's showing that the match that I have with Des is also on my maternal line where it should be. So I then tested Des for his howDNA later that same year. And Des is in Australia, and we were hoping that our DNA results would show matches to other people in Ireland, and that we would be able to confirm more cousins. When we first did the test, we only had one match, and that was to a Cassidy from the USA, who did have some family tree information published on his match list, but doesn't respond to messages. He had actually identified an ancestor. I did more research and managed to get that ancestor further back into Ireland, and I believe he goes back to this Thomas Cassidy in Cavan, born round about 1841. And the next ancestor down the chain is James Cassidy. Now, they came from two different places according to the research, but from what I can gather they're only 250 metres apart, so not very far at all. So I believe this is the same family. Now, that particular location is actually only 25 kilometres away from where my Cassidys came from in Gort Gaul. So the howDNA test is showing that they're related, but the match isn't super close, and it's a number of steps apart, which suggests that it's not a direct relationship, and that it might be a little bit more distant than coming from the same ancestor. So we don't think that Thomas Cassidy is a child of Stephen Cassidy, for example. So a bit of time went on, and in September 2017, after much nagging, Oliver finally tested at Family Tree DNA, and lo and behold, we are a match. Again, the steps between our matches were a little bit distant, but he was much closer than our USA cousin. And so his ancestor, Owen Cassidy, comes from Coolarkin, which is very, very close to Gort Gaul, about 3 kilometres away. So it's much more likely that we are closer cousins. However, Oliver doesn't share any autosomal DNA with Des or any of my family, so that seems to suggest that the relationship might be a little bit further back and possibly more like fifth cousins. Finally, in 2019, we had another tester, John, who's sadly now deceased, and he was a descendant of Thomas's brother Philip, the second brother who was transported to Australia. So that was wonderful, and he matched everybody the same as Des in the same sort of relationships. So as far as back in 2016, as far as autosomal testing was going, I was clearly getting lots of matches to my ancestors, Thomas Cassidy and Mary Sweeney, which were showing that my Cassidy lines are pretty firm. The howDNA testing, as you saw, in a few years' time has shown us that there are other Cassidy connections back to Fermanagh. But what about James? One great thing that happened in 2017 is that I found one of my cousins, Don, tested at Ancestry, and that was a great surprise to me when I saw him appear on my match list. And I encouraged him to transfer his results to GEDmatch so we could compare his results with people who tested at other companies. And Ancestry doesn't provide any howDNA information, and it was great that once we put it at GEDmatch, we found that on the X chromosome we had quite a number of matches with my family showing that their shared ancestor could be Catherine Britton. And since 2017 we've had several more people who have also matched on the X chromosome at this point, so I'm very confident that the James Cassidy who was in the US is in fact a brother of my other Cassidys, Thomas, Philip and Edward, who were transported to Australia, and that their mother's name is Catherine. So this is what our genetic tree is looking like. So I said before that I was pretty confident up to the ancestors of Thomas Cassidy and Mary Sweeney. So now I'm very confident back to the level of Stephen Cassidy and his wife Catherine Britton. I've got howDNA and autosomal matches through Des. I've got howDNA and autosomal matches through John. And Don's family I have autosomal matches and xDNA matches. Unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be any living Cassidys, male Cassidys, that is, carrying the Y chromosome in that family group that I can test. Most of my matches in that line, and there are many of them, are related via female Cassidys and all have different surnames. So I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to confirm through howDNA that they are related on that Cassidy line, but there's enough evidence on the autosomal and X chromosome, in my opinion, to confirm that they are related. By testing Oliver and his howDNA, we can now go back to another generation, and I've had to sort of construct this tree as to how we might be related based on the results. And as I said earlier, Oliver does not share any DNA, or autosomal DNA that is, with any of the others on the right hand side who are descended from Stephen Cassidy. So that suggests to me that it's another generation back and that they're more likely to be fifth cousins, as I've demonstrated in this chart. But we need more testers to be able to get further back and to understand this more fully. Our other US match in who's related to the Cavan Cassidy line is also been put into this tree as to how he might fit. There could be another generation in there, as he's a much more distant match than even to Des and John as than Oliver. Oliver is closer. Now, I've also done a lot of analysis with my Britain line, and this is just an example of one of the things that you can do. So this Catherine Britton is the mother of Thomas Cassidy and Philip Cassidy, and this is actually a slide that I put together in 2019. I actually have many more matches now on this line, and unfortunately the chart is so big that it doesn't fit on a slide. So I've used the 2019 one, and all of these people from across the world are matching and are triangulating, which is a term in autosomal DNA for when you're trying to match people back beyond second great grandparents, that you need to triangulate with them, which means sharing a specific segment on a chromosome. So it takes a little bit more work there. And I've even got matches in Israel and other places, which is very exciting, including Ireland as well. So these are the number of siblings. There's quite a number of these Britain siblings, and I expect there'll be many more cousins out there that might help us get back. And in this case, the Britain side of the family, we expect to go back to Scotland. But that's just to give you an example of what can be achieved. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the emerging Edward story. As I mentioned earlier, he was transported to the colony in 1830 along with his brothers Thomas and Philip, but he escaped in 1833. Now, McGuinness suggests that he returned to Ireland in 1835 for his sweetheart and then took her to America. So when he was arrested in 1849, masquerading as Cicero Cassido, he was described as a true patriot. So one theory might be that he came back to Ireland around 1848 or before then, as that was the time of the Young Islander Rebellion. The other interesting thing about Edward is that the song Loch Ern's Shore is said to have been written about him. Now, on the 30th of September 1848, there was an advertisement in the paper for a lost relative, and by the name of Edward Cassidy of Turbidane, parish of Bow, Fermanagh. So is this my Edward Cassidy? The article suggests he was last seen 2 years ago in Toronto, Upper Canada, which ties in nicely with what we know about Edward, having turned up in Ireland by 1849. Is Turbidane? We know it's of special interest to us because my Thomas Cassidy actually rented lands in Turbidane according to the Tyre articles before he was transported. James went missing, US James, in 1844. So one theory I might have had is that could James be Edward? Also, by the time of the Griffiths valuation in 1859, there's a John Cassidy married to Margaret Maguire. Now, is he a relative or not? Perhaps Edward went back to reside with the family still living there. I've done a bit of research on John Cassidy and his wife Margaret Maguire, and it would appear that perhaps John Cassidy is related to Owen Cassidy, who's an ancestor of Oliver. So there could be some validity in this theory. So the Maguire family have a long-standing history of connection over the centuries with the Cassidy clans, so it's not surprising to see that name emerging. When I looked at the 1859 Griffiths valuation, You could see here the number of Britons and Maguires that are still residing in the area. And the Britons were in Tullyholven Lower, which is at the top of the townland of Leskie, and Gorkgall was just below there. But there's no Cassidys in the Griffiths valuation by 1859, but there are plenty of Britons and Maguires. And so the Maguire name is also of great interest to me. So in this map of the Griffiths valuation, you can see the number of Maguires and Britons that are scattered around the place. So do these families hold a key to our puzzle? Topradan is a little bit south of here, which is where Edward may have been residing. And it's not surprising that he might have gone back there if that's where Thomas Cassidy, his brother, was living prior to transportation. And the current occupant, John, may definitely have been a relative of some kind. So looking at the list of tenants in the Griffiths valuation, you can see there are a number of Maguires that are of interest to me, current or living in Gorkgall at that time. No Cassidys, but plenty of Maguires. And another reason I'm very interested in Maguires is due to a range of autosomal DNA matches I have that are emerging as looking to be connected to my family. So could this Thomas Cassidy, born around 1806, be my Thomas? And could Bridget Maguire be his first wife? It's very unclear because the son James there is born in 1827. Now, that's before Thomas was transported, but it's not... we expected Thomas to have two daughters, which is what it states in the convict indents. Now, Bridget is listed in the 1851 census living in Scotland as a widow, so it ties in with what we know. Perhaps she was just calling herself a widow because her husband had been transported. Now, this couple, Thomas and Bridget Maguire, also had another son who was born in 1839. So that makes two boys. So did the convict indents record them incorrectly, and were they really two sons rather than two daughters back in Ireland? Another thought is that perhaps these matches are coming from the Briton or Maguire side. As far as the Briton line goes, I don't think that's likely, as none of these people seem to match all my other Briton cousins, or any of my other Briton cousins that I showed earlier. So I think that's an unlikely scenario, but the Maguires could be a connection further back in time, perhaps. I need to do more research on the Maguire side of the family, or of this family, I should say. I also considered whether James 1827 could be another sibling, but most of the dates don't seem to line up, so I don't think that's a possibility, even though he does name his son Thomas Edward Cassidy. Another theory could be that Thomas 1806 is actually our escaped convict Edward. The fact that his two children, James born 1827 and son born 1839, has such a significant gap, could he have whilst the convict indents said he was single when he arrived in Australia, could he have already had a child with Bridget back in Ireland? And was this the reason he wanted to go back and be reunited with his sweetheart and take her to America, according to the family stories? It certainly looks like a plausible explanation, but we really need more evidence to support that theory. Or is all that far too fanciful and Thomas is just another cousin that I have yet to connect to my Cassidy tree? Do you recognise any of the names I've been talking about today? Can you help me by doing DNA tests to see whether we are related? I would love to hear from any of you that might be able to help me in my quest. This is an ongoing project for me, and I'm very keen to resolve these issues. So just before I finish up, I just wanted to recap on my DNA goals that I talked about at the beginning of this session. And I've achieved 3 out of 4 of these goals. Now, the first one was to find a male DNA cousin to test and to confirm that my family in Australia were the right family, and that was Des and now John, who have both done Y-DNA tests and have confirmed the Australian line. My second goal was about finding a cousin back in Ireland, and thanks to Oliver testing back in 2017, we have confirmed that our family does come from Fermanagh, and we have also confirmed that the US James is another brother of Thomas, Philip and Edward, and their mother's name was Catherine. So that's all great, but I'm yet to identify Thomas's first wife and 2 daughters and locate their family, or to find what happened to Edward, although I believe I'm very close to solving one of those with those Maguire Cassidy matches that I do have. So watch this space for further developments. Hopefully by the time of the next Cassidy Clan Gathering we'll have answered some of those questions. So a couple of final messages for DNA research. DNA is just one of the many tools for family historians, and it provides evidence of a relationship but doesn't always prove a relationship, except for very close matches like parent-child and half-siblings, etc. It works hand in hand with traditional research, so you really need to start with your traditional research, look at what the DNA is telling you, and continually go back and forth between those two things to resolve your DNA mysteries. As you can see with my research, it can be a long-term project, but it's very rewarding, and if you like solving puzzles like I do, it's an ongoing challenge. So that's all I have for you today. I hope I've given you something to think about in looking at your own family history and your own DNA research. So enjoy your time in Fermanagh, and I hope to see you next time in a few years' time. If you've got any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email, cassidyclandna@gmail.com. Thanks very much.